Hello everyone and welcome to the ArcuFantasies YouTube channel, and boy does this tea keep coming. So if you watched yesterday's video, you will be a little familiar with what's going on. Actually, you'll have pretty much all the information that was originally made publicly available about this whole records situation and Cora report request out of Colorado. Now, if you didn't watch the first video, I will link it below. I highly recommend you go. I get it. It takes a while to get through my ranting. Pretty much I recommend watching it at time and a half because that's how I watch all of my videos, so why shouldn't you? But this story continues into today. And before we get any further along in the story, because I figured this was going to go on beyond one video, I suspect it might go beyond two. I'm hoping it doesn't go beyond three, because I'm hoping by the time I make the third video, Mr. Jojola will have had his meeting and will understand, hopefully, what's going on in the world around him. That being said, this is in no way an endorsement for anyone to go to his channels and say anything derogatory or dogpile on him or anything like that. I've already had the argument that I'm going to have with him, I think, and so now we're just reporting on the developments of this not story, which I guess it is kind of a story, because I'll have some opinions at the end that as an academically trained archaeologist and observer, I'm really fascinated by this whole thing, and I'm very aware of my part that I'm playing in it, so there's that. Also, I personally am not representing the state of Colorado. I don't represent the state archaeologist in Colorado. I have nothing to do with anybody in any of these positions other than these are people that I follow on Twitter. Everything that I'm talking about has been made publicly available. So it's not like I have access to anything behind the scenes, and this is stuff that anyone could go and get if they just spent some time on Twitter and YouTube. And I'm actually trying to make it as easy as possible by giving you links in the show notes below. Yesterday, a tweet came to my attention from a friend on Twitter, and again, you can go find this if you want to. I'm not going to link that exactly. I will link to the History Colorado group, who is the official group that is handling this situation. So do go check out History of Colorado, and you should be able to find everything there. But my friend was responding to a tweet that had been put out by a Jeremy Jojola on Twitter. And again, I really do apologize if I'm saying your last name wrong. I really do apologize for that. I'm trying to do my best. Anyway, Mr. Jojola put up a tweet that I have in the corner here. I have in the corner here. Well, I have a new personal record for a Cora request, $250,000 for a database, and then there's redaction time. And then he posts a clip from the full letter. I know there's more to the letter because you can tell by just how this thing just abruptly starts. There's probably more correspondence, as he does kind of allude to that in a video that he makes that we'll address later on. Anyway, the cost for everything that he requested is broken down. Now, this tweet is incredibly out of context. There's no explanation for what this has to do with anything. There's no explanation for why he's requested what he has. And so there's no way to understand directly from this tweet why he's being charged what he is. There are a few things that we can pull from this tweet without knowing anything else that kind of puts a little bit of suspicion on the initial tweet to begin with. And that's the itemized breakdown of why he's being charged for the things he's being charged for. And the initial price here, it says just for the initial work, you can see it in the tweet, is only $2,243. And that's for the original 1,200 reports plus 6 hours of work that History Colorado had already put into his request. And then there's this number down here where they're mentioning that there's a second database. And that database has a cost of $1 per report. And whatever the criteria of his request has generated 300,000 reports that match his criteria. Now, they did say that they were going to remove the 50K of redundant sites. So that brought his price, just base starting, to 250,000. So in all reality, the 250,000 isn't even actually the price that they were quoting him, because they don't charge him for labor at this point, because they don't know how long it's going to take them to gather the information, check it, redact it, and then ship it off to him. And that's something that a human being has to do. Somewhere, a living person is going to have to go do this for him. And right now, they're just quoting him the cost of accessing each file on the database, which again, is only $1. It's $1, people. The other one was 25 cents per report. I'm not really sure in whose world that's a high cost, considering archaeological reports start around 10 to 15 pages and can go up to a few thousand. He's only getting charged $1 per report, regardless of how large it is. I just want to point that out as we go forward. So this was the tweet that went out on the 15th. Today is the 17th officially. So this was all people were given. And then there was he put up a second tweet the same day, I believe, or maybe the next day, where he has created a 3-minute video. Now, I went over the 3-minute video in the last video in my series. So you can follow the link and go back to that and read it and watch it too. In it, he does kind of break down what was going on. And I have a lot to say about 3 minutes of video, so I'm going to save all of that for you to go check out in the other video. And we're just going to talk about this tweet right now. Again, he brings up the $250,000 for public records. And now his two main points here is he's being charged too much. This is his feeling. He's being charged too much, and these records are public. So he feels like he has every right to access these reports. This is not exactly correct. And it only comes out later in the video why I'm telling you that. He also is going out of his way to drag the history of Colorado through as much mud as he can right off the bat. He again has given no context. He's not saying why. He just, from these two tweets, it's just very evident that he got a very high bill for records that he wants, and he doesn't like the bill. So instead of asking questions or talking directly to people or doing the mature thing and waiting for a response if he had already asked for a question, he just goes on to social media and on YouTube and starts making videos and tweets that are kind of degrading of this public organization. So what happened? I went and watched his video. In his video, he kind of breaks down why his bill is the way it is and what exactly he was looking for, which he is requesting documents dealing with human remains, specifically indigenous human remains in the state of Colorado. Now, there is a law that supersedes public records, and it's called NAGPRA. NAGPRA is the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. And among other things that NAGPRA does, again, it's not a perfect law. I will be the first one to admit that. But one of the things that NAGPRA tries to do is protect Native American remains whenever they are found. Another thing that was in play that I would have thought Mr. Jojola was aware of, seeing as he's from Colorado, is a Colorado law that actually decrees how unmarked human remains are to be handled when they're discovered. Now, the remains that started this whole story off were apparently discovered back in, I want to say, April or May of this year during a construction project. It sucks that this is how those remains were discovered. It's, unfortunate. But when that happened, the state of Colorado started following their format. And you want to know how I know about what the state of Colorado's formula for discovery of unmarked graves are? I Googled it. It took me less than 5 minutes to find the law and the code that is followed by the state of Colorado when unmarked graves are found. So when these remains were found, the state of Colorado called in the coroner to determine if the remains were more than 100 years old, because at that point, the remains then need to be handed off to the state archaeologist. And it is now the state archaeologist's job to try and identify the remains and get these people back to their respective descendants. This is very important because if these remains are not modern settler remains, then that means they're probably indigenous remains, again, falling under the NAGPRA law, and again, human beings who need to be returned to their descendants. It's not hard. It's just respectful. So long and short, state of Colorado is following their own guidelines, their own laws, and the national laws that are in place to protect human remains when they are discovered in unmarked graves. Mr. Jojola claims that he has a keen interest in history, and so because of that, he was interested in these remains. It's natural to be curious about these kind of things. I'm not going to knock that. And I guess there's something about human remains that just draws our imaginations and our attention. And I get that Mr. Jojola is interested in what has become of these people, but the methods that he decided to use to find out were incredibly disingenuous and sensationalized for no reason. Mr. Jojola emailed the state archaeologist, spoke with a representative, and asked, "Hey, I'm interested in what happened to these remains. Can you tell me?" And he received a reply back saying, "No. Out of respect for the NAGPRA laws and the Native Americans in Colorado, we don't comment on cases involving human remains." Pretty cut and dry, and fairly polite. Mr. Jojola, in all disclosure, is an investigative reporter for 9 News in Denver, and decided that answer wasn't good enough. So he sent a second email asking for more information after being told that there would be no comment. And he received no comment. Perfectly logical. I guess at this point, and this is something that I'm picking up from both the email and the continuing Twitter thread that went all through yesterday and is continuing into today, apparently. Mr. Jojola then decided that there was something weird going on, and he was going to get to the bottom of it. So he made a document request. Now, he doesn't say what he thought was going on other than, "I'm just curious." Well, okay, lots of people are curious about a lot of things. That doesn't mean that they have a right to go harass people. I don't care if you're a reporter. Get to go harass people because you didn't get the answer you wanted. So Mr. Jojola makes a request for archaeological site data. And he makes this of from the History of Colorado organization, which is why these people in particular are getting dragged through the mud for no real reason. Now, what he requested was 3 years of data on all human remain cases in the state of Colorado from all of the databases that the state of Colorado has access to. At the time, see, I already knew this was going to be a lot of data because there are multiple databases that the state of Colorado has access to. And when you ask for that, I mean, I don't think, to be kind here, I don't think Mr. Jojola understood exactly what he was asking for when he made this request. I don't think he understood the scope of the data and the scope of the databases that he was requesting. That being said, he received an invoice back with the before mentioned quote in it, and he didn't like the price. And because he didn't like the price, he decided that there was some kind of grand conspiracy happening to keep him from having access to this data by charging him this outrageous price. Now, don't get me wrong. I would probably be really shocked if I had requested something and then got a price tag of $250,000. Yeah, but then I would probably call and ask somebody and be like, hey, this seems really high. What's going on? Mr. Jojola didn't appear to do that right off the bat. It appears that he initially just freaked out about the price, ran to social media, started making tweets and videos about it, and then after the fact, went and actually asked somebody about it. I'm not sure exactly what happened at this point. All I can do is piece this together through tweets that occurred and through the Twitter thread that Mr. Jojola then posted after he started getting some constructively critical tweets back on Twitter. And this is where things really start to get kind of dicey for Mr. Jojola, in my opinion. Because, you know, he went to Twitter, he put up this invoice, he starts trying to smear History of Colorado.
I'm reminding you.
Mr. Jojola then began to be contacted on Twitter by other archaeologists, actual archaeologists. There's a lot of us on Twitter. We like talking to people. So several of them, before even I got involved, several of them had gone on Mr. Jojola's Twitter feed and responded directly to his initial tweets, explaining to him that not only was the price not unreasonable, but I believe in the last tweet, someone was like, oh, for that price, you better be getting the whole database. And someone pointed out that he kind of was getting the whole database for that price, and that he had been, and also the state History of Colorado tweeted that they had asked him to reduce the scope of his request because it was too broad. And because of it being so broad, that was why he got the results back. So, you know, he received some polite criticism about just reduce the number of records you're asking for and it'll bring your price point down. And someone else was like, I don't think he understands what he's asking for. And I think they were right. That wasn't a me tweet, that was somebody else tweeting. And I agree with that tweet. Now, what happened from that point forward was Mr. Jojola went on the defensive. And instead of saying, oh, gee, maybe I should have just asked somebody questions, he started changing the narrative on the fly. He began with starting off with his reasons for being curious and changing those reasons through a few other tweets till he finally got to the point where he was like, well, what I really want to know is how the state of Colorado handles unmarked graves and human remains discovered therein. And this is literally a question he could have emailed or called the state archaeologist and just straight asked exactly how he worded it and would have gotten a response. Also, again, a less than 5-minute Google search produced the Colorado laws and objectives on how they handle unmarked graves and human remains. So if that really was the question he was really after, he could have answered that question several different ways without going onto Twitter and complaining about his bill. And keep in mind, this is just a quote. It's just an estimate. He hasn't actually been charged any of this money yet, and he won't be charged it because I'm pretty sure he's not going to go forward with all of these records. That's a lot of money. And also, where are you going to put those records? Do you know how much data that is? I mean, even if they're all in like PDFs, that's a lot of data. A lot. Anyway, so then he decided that the story was no longer about his curiosity and about him wanting to know about what happened to human remains. The story was now about why he was being stonewalled, basically, and being charged so much for a simple records request. And so people started pointing that out to him. I made a video about why that was so expensive. Several individuals on Twitter contacted him and was like, look, man, it's $1 a report. You asked for 300K reports. You do the math. And so then Mr. Jojola decided that this was actually a case of public records costing too much and being prohibitively expensive, when in reality, he's paying the same prices that any archaeologist would pay if they went into the state and asked for the same reports. Like, these are the costs that everyone pays. It's not him. And this wasn't like a special price just for him because no one wants him to know what's going on in these archaeology reports. That's not the case at all. Also, 25 cents and $1 per report, again, not a lot of money. I'm just saying. The price that he's really needing to look out for is the labor cost, and in both situations, he got the first hour of labor free. If he just reduced the number of reports that he wanted, he wouldn't have to pay for labor, and he would only have to pay for the reports themselves. Nobody is preventing him from getting access to these reports. No one is preventing him from paying and reducing his questions. Hell, he could even get all 300K reports that he wanted if he'd just break them up into 1-hour chunks and spread it out over time, as opposed to asking for all of it right now. Another thing that he really started harping on was the redaction. And there are many, 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 many really good reasons why we redact information, especially in archaeological reports. And I kind of went into that a little bit in my last video, but I kind of want to reiterate it here. Archaeological resources, whatever they are very easily destroyed and are sought after by people who want to loot them. They want to go in and just dig everything up and then go on the black market, or even not even the black market, just go on eBay and start selling this stuff for money. We're trying our best to protect archaeological sites by not publishing their actual location. Back in the 90s, there was a case where over 100 sites, their information was stolen and they were published on the internet. All 100 of those sites were looted. All of them, because they were suddenly public knowledge. There is a difference between me telling you about an archaeological site and the things we found in it, and me telling you exactly where this archaeological site is so that you can go see it yourself. There's also a difference between large archaeological sites that are open to the public, things like Moundsville and Angel Mounds in the Midwest, where you're encouraged to go and visit because those sites are protected at all times. They have security on them. You're not going to get random people just kind of walking up to the mounds and starting to dig at them. Or if you do, they're probably going to get caught because it's illegal. I'm very sorry if you don't agree with that, but these are natural resources that once they're gone, they're gone. And so people destroying them willy-nilly destroys them for everyone. Another reason why we would redact information out of these reports is because a lot of these archaeological sites are on private land. These are private individuals who own the land. They don't want their names and their addresses and the locations of these sites that are on their property being broadcast to everyone in Colorado. They would like their privacy, please. And so these are the major reasons why we redact information. We're trying to protect sites, and we're trying to protect personal information from private individuals. I'm not really sure why that's difficult or where the conspiracy in there is, but apparently there is one. So after receiving all of this negative, in his words, negative feedback from the archaeological community, because again, there were several of us involved in these conversations, and I will say that I did get a little testy, but that's okay. Mr. Jojola was not exactly receptive in his own tweets. So Mr. Jojola decided that he was going to put up a Twitter thread. Fine. He put up a 10-point Twitter thread. I have the beginning of it here. I'll see if I can't link it in the show notes below. And this is really great because in this Twitter thread, you can start seeing him trying to change the narrative, but also keep pushing this idea that there's a conspiracy to keep him from accessing this data. Even though he has been told by everyone he's not being kept from this data. He's been told probably not the information you're looking for. Probably you could just ask somebody and you'll get an answer right away. The reason your bill is so high is because you asked for so much, and there's no conspiracy keeping you from any of this. You have complete access to it. You just have to pay $1 per report. So he puts this thread up. And I'm just going to read the beginning of it. Again, I'll put the link in the bottom. I've already responded to this point by point, honestly. And this started the larger conversation that I tried to have with Mr. Jojola, where it got to the point where we were basically just repeating ourselves to each other. But in the meantime, some interesting things were happening in the Twitter thread comment web that gets created when you tweet. So he says, serious question. Am I wrong for questioning the cost of a $250,000 database from the state? I'm taken aback by the responses I've received from the people in the archaeological community. So what's happening here is, again, even after being explained why it was that expensive, he's still trying to push this narrative that there is a outrageous amount of money being asked for something so simple. And he's also now deciding that it's not just the history of Colorado and the state archaeologists who are the bad guys in this. He's now starting to paint the entire archaeological community as part of this conspiracy. All of us are working to keep him from getting access to this data. Even though none of us have done that, all of us have tried to explain to him, you have access to this, you're just asking for, you don't know what you're asking for. Maybe you should bring it down some, or just ask somebody. And so then he starts to kind of start pulling on threads, trying to build a bigger story out of this. He brings in the fact that I guess in Colorado they're having issues with public corruption, I'm guessing, and high public record costs are a way that they're trying to keep people from getting access to these things. Again, he was being charged 25 cents and $1. He then starts in about the publicness of the records and how these records belong to all of us, trying to create the bigger narrative that there's a huge conspiracy of all of us trying to keep everything from everybody. Again, it had been explained to him, everyone has access to these records, he just has to pay for it, and if he would just call and ask somebody, people would be more than happy to answer his questions. And again, he's trying to paint the archaeological community as being the bad guys here, even though none of the things he's actually accusing us of were anything that anyone did. He just keeps building this snowball of a theory that we're trying to make him a bad guy, when really we're just addressing, initially we were addressing his need to look at dead bodies for no apparent reason, no explained or apparent reason at the beginning, and then only later that he decide why he wanted to look at them. After everybody started calling him out on it, he was then like, oh, I want to know how these things are handled. That was after he already made an issue about the fact that he wasn't able to look at them when he wanted to. And then he continued to push the narrative that he's being overcharged for documents, even though it's been explained. I know I keep saying this, but this is the big point for me. It was explained to him why it was so expensive and how he could bring the cost down. Also, the questions he claimed he wanted answered are not going to be answered by these archaeological reports, because that information isn't in the archaeological reports. He claims he wants to know how human remains in unmarked graves are handled in the state of Colorado. Again, you can Google it, and you can just call someone. So the last thing I want to kind of show is some of the responses that he was getting to his tweet later on in the conversation. So these are responses that are occurring after the initial response by History of Colorado, basically saying that he was being disingenuous in his tweets and his video. This is after the state archaeologist had reached out to him and set up a meeting with him to discuss what he was looking for. And this is after several other archaeologists had already reached out to him on Twitter, explaining to him his bill and also explaining to him why this ambiguous need he initially had to look at human remains was so upsetting to so many. That one, by the way, he just kind of like started to ignore and just kind of pushed off and decided that it was no longer really about that. It was really about him being blocked and people not wanting him to look into this thing. Again, both of those are not real claims. Both of those have been addressed. No one was stopping him. I'm still very concerned about why Mr. Jojola wants to look at all of these reports about human remains, specifically because I don't think that he really is concerned about the way human remains are treated in the state of Colorado, just based on how he decided to go about this investigation. I think, this is my personal opinion, I think this is being sensationalized, and I think the greater points are being ignored, and that is the rights, the indigenous rights, to access to their ancestors' remains. And Mr. Jojola's initial, he was actually initially denied the ability to look at them and to follow up as to where they were, because it's like if my grandmother died and random stranger thought the way she died was weird, actually just thought the way she died was interesting, because those are the words he used. I was interested. I was curious. And so random stranger starts calling the hospital and demanding my grandmother's medical records and death certificate. This is kind of exactly the same thing. It's just these individuals are 100 to 1,000 years old. And they don't have anybody living connected to them right now to kind of stand in Mr. Jojola's way. So that's what the state of Colorado did. And pretty much for the same reason. They are respecting the descendants of these individuals, and they're respecting the individuals themselves. I'm sorry if Mr. Jojola doesn't like that, but his like or dislike doesn't supersede the rights of the individuals and the people descended from these individuals. That's my soapbox. I'm going to step off of it. So Mr. Jojola kept trying to push his narrative, and people just stopped kind of being friendly about it. It is the internet. People will only put up with that for so long. And so he actually started getting called out directly. People saying, you are getting the entire library for that price. And then another individual who is herself a journalist in the past, I guess you're always a journalist, really. She tried to explain this to him as well through several tweets. This is just one of several. Trying to explain to him that like, here she's lost her patience with him. She's like, you're literally lying. You're claiming 250 is for a specific request when the screen grab itself says that the cost is only 2,000. The 250 is clearly stated for all 300K sites. Even if it was 300K sites for one time period, that ask would still be reasonable. It's 300K sites, again, at $1 a piece. I just hope that sticks with you after we're done with this video. Around this point, Mr. Hola stopped being receptive to anyone, and, I mean, let's be completely honest. The conversation de-evolved at this point in general, and Mr. Hola then started muting everyone involved in the conversation on the archaeologist's end, and then took to his Twitter and started complaining about how we were all being mean to him, and we're all attacking him, and therefore we must be hiding something. And this leads into my greater point, or the greater point for me, honestly. This whole thing has been really interesting to me as an archaeologist, especially as an archaeologist who deals with debunking and interacting with pseudo-archaeology and the fringe, because I have always wondered exactly how this kind of stuff gets started. Like, how does the idea of Atlantis take off? How does the idea of ancient aliens kind of take off? It's okay if there's just this one person out there who's like, fish people live under the sea in palaces and they're the original inhabitants of the earth, and, you know, aliens came from the sky and they seeded the earth with human DNA and that's why we are the way we are. These things sound off to the average person. But these are two incredibly popular ideas. A lot of people believe that aliens visit the planet, and a lot of people believe that Atlantis was a real place and possibly still is. So how do ideas like this take off? How do they get a foothold? Why do they continue to propagate into what is now the modern era? Because, I mean, the ancient aliens idea started in the late 80s, early 70s, something like that. And Atlantis goes all the way back to like the 1800s, the late 1800s. So these are ideas that have some staying power. I'm not saying that this $250,000 price tag, oh my God, the archaeologists in Colorado don't want me to know what's going on. I'm not saying that this is going to be an endearing conspiracy that's going to survive the ages. But what it is interesting is to watch how Mr. Hola started this whole thing. He is a person of prestige on Twitter. I don't know how much he does for 9 News in Denver. I'm not from Colorado. I don't watch Colorado local news. I might now, or at least go to the website. So, hey, you got yourself a viewer. But I mean, up until this point, I have no idea who this guy was. And he had no idea who I was, because why would he? But he does have quite a large following on Twitter. So when he goes onto Twitter and he throws up these incredibly ambiguous, very loaded, definitely pointing towards a certain outcome tweets without a lot of information or explanation as to what's going on, his readers and his fans and his followers see this. And same thing with the YouTube video. Again, there was a lot of context that was not put into that video. It was very biased and very directed towards a certain outcome. You had to really read between the lines to see what was going on in that video. Again, his YouTube video viewers went and watched this video. Now, I'm sure a good number of those people were other archaeologists just trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Props. I'm not slamming any followers, any viewers. Please do not take this way. What I am saying, though, is Mr. Jojola is in a position of authority. He has a certain respectability to him. He's a reporter. He's a news reporter. That's supposed to mean something. And so people who follow him are going to him for information that they're hoping, maybe not unbiased, I don't know, but they're at least expecting it to be truthful and to be unfiltered, maybe. And That's not what they got out of these tweets. But because that's what they were expecting, they processed this information that was given to them in that manner. And so now you have people on Twitter, and this is something that I've been interacting with today. You've got people who are seeing the initial tweet, they're seeing one or two of the responses, and the nature of the internet is most people don't read responses past like what the fifth or 10th response. So you've got people who are not reading the whole story. Most people are not going to do that. I'm not slamming people. That's just the nature of the internet. But now what you have to deal with, and especially that I'm dealing with, and not in a bad way, I'm fascinated by this happening. I have people that are sending me comments, and it's clear that they haven't read the entire conversation because they're commenting on part of the conversation that happened way early and that has been addressed several times. But now this is the first time they've seen it, so now they were going to ask me about it. So I'm getting people doing that. And I'm getting people who have stopped following the conversation at a certain point, and they're not going any farther in the conversation. So they're not receiving any new information, and they're stuck with the bad information that they initially got, and they don't have access to, or they refuse to read the rest of it. And I can see their mindsets. Like, I can see the thoughts developing through the tweets that they're sending me. And I find this really fascinating because it's the same kind of conspiracy talk that you encounter when you're dealing with pseudoarchaeology. And it's the same kind of responses that you're dealing with when you talk with people online, especially online. Like, this is almost exclusively, I believe, an online phenomena. This whole conspiracy mind, there's a why are you trying to prevent the truth? Like, I cannot count how many times Mr. Hola used the truth in his tweets, and some of his followers did as well. It's the idea that there's some deep ingrained a conspiracy, I can't use that word enough apparently, that we don't want getting out. And I can't even begin to imagine what that must be. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's a real conspiracy or not. Mr. Hola's followers now believe that there's a conspiracy, and it is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to change any of their minds. Another thing that is interesting that Mr. Hohola kept saying was, I'm going to keep investigating this, and if it turns out to be nothing, then, well, that's just what happens with investigations. Well, someone tweeted back to him and was like, that's fine, but if your investigation comes up empty and it turns out that you were really just, making a mountain out of a molehill, are you then going to come onto Twitter and admit that? And Mr. Hohola conveniently did not respond to that, probably because he had that person muted at that point. But that's kind of the thing. Mr. Hole has created this conspiracy narrative and has made this grandiose claim that he's going to continue to follow this story until the very end, but he's not committed to reporting what the end result's going to be. So we don't know that when he does finally find out that this is really just kind of a comedy of errors that he's blown out of proportion, we don't know if he's going to go and talk to his followers and be like, hey, yeah, remember that thing I did back in October where I made this big deal out of a bill that I didn't like? Yeah, turns out I was wrong. I don't think he's going to do that. We have no reason to believe that he's going to do that. So that means that this conspiracy narrative is just going to kind of hang out forever on the internet. And it's just going to feed into this idea that you can't trust academics and that all academics are mean and none of the academics want to deal with the media. And it's like, lots of academics deal with the media, but frankly, if they're like you, yeah, they don't want to deal with you. Anyway, I know I've rambled for a good long time here. Thank you all for watching. Again, I'm anticipating one more video. I'm not anticipating a part 3 unless things really get weird. So If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe, hit the little bell button, leave a comment below. You can reach me at archyfantasies@gmail.com. You can go to my blog, which is archyfantasies.com, and you can follow me on Twitter. So see everybody in the next video, and thanks for watching.